what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the suggestion, speaking of Novichok, by an anti-Putin activist called Bill Browder, that the Russian leader plans to assassinate more enemies on British soil, just as he did with the Salisbury poisonings in 2018. Now, Browder, who is a tycoon that's provoked Putin's ire many years ago and has campaigned to stop him ever since, really, says he's going to embark on a killing spree, which will include all enemies in the UK. And I'm quoting him there. He's going to embark on a killing spree. Now, here's a little clip I think we've got of the kind of thing that Bill Browder has been saying.
Well, what we have here is Russians protesting against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. These are people in the opposition to Putin. Everybody talks about how the Russians are brainwashed. These people aren't brainwashed. These are Russian citizens, Russian emigres who are saying that Putin's murderous war in Ukraine is not okay. That's a very important thing to be seeing right now.
And that's the kind of thing that Browder says about Putin. He's very much out there, out and proud. He's got huge amounts of personal security. He's had death threats and goodness knows what else as a result of his kind of constant work to stop Putin. One of the things he's been doing has been trying to block and freeze financial assets of Russia and its oligarchs all around the world. So it's part of the reason Putin really doesn't like him. But John, can you take us through this? Because he's been talking separately to our colleague Chris Hughes today in the paper. What are his allegations, really? What does he think is going to happen?
Yes, it says there on the front page today, chilling warning, and it is a pretty chilling warning. His basic argument is after Alexei Navalny died last week in Russia, he believes that Putin will feel emboldened. He will feel that he can do whatever he wants without there being much consequence. And he reckons there's about 12, a mixture of UK and Russian citizens living in the UK who he thinks would be on a Putin hit list, who he'd quite like to get rid of. And he suggests that on the back of the killing of Navalny, Putin might think, well, I can get away with that as well. And we obviously saw back in 2018, remember the Salisbury poisonings when we had Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were killed, or they weren't killed. They were poisoned with Novichok. They weren't killed, but ended up being Dawn Sturgis, who was someone who came across the bottle Novichok had been in, who actually was the one who did get killed. And so I think that it's probably likely that Putin may feel that he can get away with whatever he wants. He's obviously killed, or it seems like he killed Navalny in open sight in a prison in Russia. And as much as the West has talked about the possibility of further sanctions on Russia, at this moment in time, we haven't actually seen them happen. I think, though, if you did start to see Putin killing more people on UK soil, you would see some sort of response. So remember, after the Skripals, we saw the UK got rid of loads of Russian spies from the UK, and other countries around the world did the same. Remember, it was that time when it was Theresa May was in power, Donald Trump was in power in the US, and there were concerns that Donald Trump was possibly a bit soft on Putin. But actually, Theresa May did manage to persuade him to kick out loads of Russian spies from the US as well. And maybe people will think, well, that wasn't really much. That's not really impacted Putin that much. Is that really a price that he's going to be scared that he will have to pay again? Possibly not. And we've seen after Ukraine that obviously there have been quite severe sanctions that have been brought in by the UK, the US, and other countries, but still the Russian economy is still managing to chug along. He's still managing to get money to be able to fund their war effort in Ukraine. And so there is always the scary possibility that he might feel that he can get away with whatever he wants and to start kind of knocking off some of his critics around the world rather than just in Russia.
Yeah. Now, Bill Browder probably has some connections, I'd imagine, with the intelligence community. So some of the stuff that he may know, he's not going to reveal. And he doesn't sort of present any evidence, particularly in the piece that we've got here from Chris about who or what or how many people are going to be affected by this. But he's got a fairly specific number. He says 12 and on UK soil. And what he does know, Bill Browder, because he knows Putin so well and has studied him and battled with him and so on, he knows that these kind of killings tend to come in waves of his opponents. He tends to sort of go after them, when he's in the mood for some reason or another. And obviously, having killed Alexei Navalny, one of the things that Browder's saying is just, well, this is the start of the next wave of what's going to happen. But why would Putin, do we think, would do this, would target people in the UK? If that's true, if that happens, do we have a lot of Russian dissidents here or something? Or is it just something he's got against us in particular?
Well, it's not really spelled out in the comments from Bill Browder. I imagine it's that Putin just is going to target critics in all corners of the globe, wherever they are. And it just happens to be that there are 12 or so that Bill Browder thinks they're in the UK who might be possible targets. But I don't think Putin really minds where they are, whether they're in the UK or whether they're in Canada or whether they're in Australia. I think the point he's making is there are several people here that he would like to get rid of. And as we know, Putin doesn't accept any sort of criticism. And obviously, Russia isn't really a proper democracy. There'll be elections, I think, later this year, but we know that those aren't going to be real elections, that people aren't really going to have a choice on whether they want Putin to stay or not.
No, I would imagine and hope as well that Yulia Navalny, Alexei's widow, should be the one who's watching her back most closely just at the moment. Now, I think we do have a bit of video of Bill Browder's interview with Chris Hughes. We're just going to play a little bit of it for you.
I think the murder of Alexei Navalny is a game changer. The fact that Putin would kill the most popular, prominent opposition politician in plain sight without any fear of repercussions says that people who are opposing Putin in Russia and abroad are now at a much more serious risk of assassination.
When, is it 2018? I think one, Dawn Sturgis died a few months after the attack on the Skripals. As far as you're aware, I mean, I know that I imagine you can't say too much about your security, but do you think that sort of thing could happen again in Britain?
I think that Putin, Putin has lost all restraints with the murder of Alexei Navalny, and he will embark on a international killing spree, which will include his enemies in the UK.
So that's really rather chilling when you sort of see the way Bill's talking about it. Now we've had the incident with the Skripals in Salisbury, which of course poured a number of innocent victims, including a police officer, but the one who died was Dawn Sturgis, just happened to pick up the bottle, like you said, John. We also had the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko in London a few years earlier with radioactive tea that had been smuggled into the UK. We've had a number of people, some of them financiers, who seem to have fallen out of windows suspiciously, like a lot of, it seems to be one of Putin's signature moves. Lots of thought that some of them may have been connected to that. And none of this stuff is good. It's always pretty big and bold moves, though. You can tell it's Putin because it's just so weird, whatever it is that happens. I mean, we should be able to stop some of these things before they get too far. But do you get the sense, I suppose, John, from some of your conversations in Westminster, that are the government worried about this sort of thing? Or is it just, one of those background hums of, a security threat that is just one of many?
Well, I think that obviously the government is concerned. As you say, we have seen the past history in the UK where Putin has come and tried this before. And those words there from Bill Browder are pretty chilling when he talks about an international killing spree. I think that Putin isn't someone who the government just think, oh, yeah, he just talks the talk, but doesn't actually follow through with his threats. We know he is someone who, before he invaded Ukraine, there was all the signs that he was going to do it. He was building up all the weaponry on the border with Ukraine, although at that point he was saying, oh, no, it's just an exercise. I'm not planning an invasion. And then obviously he did. I think that the UK takes very seriously what Putin does, and obviously is very cautious about different things that they could try, particularly because of that history when we have seen the attempts to kill people on British soil.
Yeah, I mean, we've got this sort of situation, I suppose, where as a result of all the things that Putin's done up till now, Russia is one of the most heavily sanctioned countries in the world. I mean, what do you think, everybody out there watching this? Are you concerned that Putin's going to do something more and do it on British soil? Or is it something you're not particularly bothered about? Is this just what despots do? They tend to sort of put a finger out and kill people somewhere, and it doesn't affect most of us. Are you worried about, sending hitmen to the UK again, whether it's with radioactive tea or Novichok or goodness knows what else next time? One of the things that Bill was talking about in his interview with Chris there was the Magnitsky Act, which is something that was named after his lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, who was murdered by Putin. And Bill Browder started this thing called a Magnitsky Act, which kind of allowed countries around the world to freeze Russian assets, which is one of the reasons Putin really hates him. And they've frozen about $240 billion. And what Bill would like to do is actually grab those assets, now they're frozen, actually take them and use it to pay for reparations on the war in Ukraine and other things. And he says that various governments around the world have supported that happening. But the British government alone is the one that doesn't really want to play ball on it. And it's not just seizing the assets, but also sort of doing prisoner swaps. There's another sort of activist who's in jail, a journalist, I think, who's in jail in Russia that Bill Browder wants to get out. And apparently he's told, the British government doesn't want to get involved in talking about prisoner swaps and things like this. If Putin actually did something like this on our soil, firstly, we don't want to get too involved. Secondly, there's the war in Ukraine to deal with. And thirdly, we've already sanctioned them a lot. What more could we possibly do? I mean, what would happen if Putin actually did go and kill 12 people on British soil tomorrow?
Well, I think that is one of the things, this idea that the assets that have been seized, but at the moment they're just frozen, they're just stuck there, nothing's being done with them. There have been calls that money should be unlocked and that money should be spent on rebuilding Ukraine, that it's Russia that's caused the damage in Ukraine, and therefore it is right and just that Russia should pay the price and that Russian assets should be used to fund that. That is an argument that some are making already in the international community. And I think if you did see Putin go further by starting to launch more, this international killing spree, as Bill Browder describes it, then I think you would see much more support for an idea such as that on the world stage.
Yeah, it would be the kind of thing that they have to do next because they've done everything else, I suppose, in one sense. Now, Luke says that, if you have his comment back up, I think it was Luke, said that Putin needs to bring an end to this war. It's gone on too long, really. I think the thing is, Putin started the war, Luke, and the reasons, I think, for it are so manifold. But within Russia, if he were to end it without having won it, I don't think that would be politically possible for him to survive. And he's probably not going to be able to win it if the Allies keep supplying Ukraine, and Ukraine can't win it on its own. So we're sort of stuck in a bit of a stalemate. Mike says, under Grant Shapps, with our country's aircraft carriers inoperable and nuclear missiles seemingly having a range of 20 feet before they splash down in the water, what the hell would we do if Russia invaded? I've thought about this many times, Mike, and as the parent of a young child, I'll tell you what we would do. We could put all the preschoolers along the White Cliffs of Dover, and they'd take out the infantry in a week or 24 hours, because the number of bugs and lurgies and random horrible vicious colds that small children get, it would be the worst kind of nerve agent and biological warfare we could possibly expel on them. There isn't, but on a more serious note, John, there isn't really much, apart from seizing those assets. We're not going to go to war with Russia, are we? Because nuclear weapons, right?
No, I think it's never going to be the West that's starting the war with Russia. It's obviously the risk that Putin decides he doesn't want to stop at Ukraine and that he will carry on. And that's why you've heard people like the head of the army a couple of weeks ago talking about, do we have enough soldiers ready if we did end up with a ground war with tanks rolling towards us? And do we need to start thinking about things, not just having the territorial army, but do you have other ways of suddenly, if you did need to have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands extra British soldiers, how would you quickly sign them up? Do you need something like a citizens' army where people could quickly leave their jobs and end up fighting for Britain if we did end up in that horrible circumstance?
Yeah, or conscription, which is one of the things that they're having to sort of do in Ukraine at the moment because they can't find volunteers anymore, funnily enough. And Mike says that was exactly the plot of War of the Worlds. Let's try not to be there too early on a Wednesday morning, Mike.